Okay, before Operation Exodus, there was many years when we were Jews of silence, but not only because we didn't have, politically, we didn't have a voice in Soviet Union, but because we didn't have any Jewish life. I was born in 1948 in the city of Donetsk, which today everybody knows that that is the center of war between Russia and Ukraine. Then it was a very peaceful city with maybe 50, 60,000 Jews and 500,000 population. And we grew knowing nothing, zero, about anything Jewish. We didn't have Bar Mitzvah, we didn't have Brit Milah, we didn't have Pesach, we didn't have Purim. We didn't know these words even. But we knew very well that we are Jewish because it is written in the ID of your parents, and so all the conversations at home are about discrimination, restrictions, what kind of university it is possible to send children, what is impossible. And to think that maybe we should fight against all this, nobody will be even thinking about it, because the only idea of life is how to adjust, how to survive in spite of all these restrictions. And the message of the parents was very clear that because you're Jew, you must be the best in physics and mathematics and chess and music and something. And maybe professionally, you'll succeed and it will help you. And then there was 1967 and miraculous victory of Israel and a lot of anti-Israeli passions in official life. But at the same time, you see that everybody around you is connecting you to Israel. And you want to understand what it means. And that's when we started reading from the books which were brought by American tourists, the underground, about our history, about ourselves, in fact, about Exodus from Egypt, and all the way to Exodus of Leonuris. And suddenly you realize that you can be part of this, such an exciting, such interesting history. And more than here are Jewish tourists who are coming from all over the world, from Miami and from London and from New York. And they all say, oh, wait a minute, your father is from Odessa, and my father is from Odessa. We are all family, we want to help you. And you find out that all these Jews of the world are from Odessa, and they all want to help you. And in addition, there is the state of Israel, which is ready to send the airplanes to help you. And that's when we started our struggle. And of course, we could never survive in this struggle. One day, for the very first day, it was not the struggle of all the Jews of the world. We are doing a small demonstration of 10 people, and we are arrested. But next day, hundreds of thousands of Jews are going on their demonstrations and mobilizing their senators, their congressmen. And that's how the struggle was built, that we discovered our identity. We suddenly found out that we are part of Jewish people. And there are so many American Jews who are coming as tourists, but they are bringing us important materials. They're taking our letters and our information. And they say that they rediscovered their identity, that they discovered that they also can be very active in Jewish history, and they can save us, they can help us. And so it was like mutual discovery. We discovered American Jewry discovered us, and Israel is in the center, and that's how the struggle started.
First, I want to thank you for doing this. Jewish Family Service and the Detroit community, Jewish community. This was a real historic moment in the history of the Jewish people, in the current history of the Jewish people. And it's 25 years, and this community once again stood up and is recognizing the anniversary, the important anniversary of that historic moment. So I thank all of you. This is a community that Joel acknowledged, Max Fisher. I think without Max Fisher, I wouldn't be sitting here. He's the guy I spoke to before I accepted the chairmanship of the UJA in 1990, and before we proceeded to do Operation Exodus. Certainly my mentor and a person that I always think about, and I can't mention his name without mentioning David Hermelin's name. I saw his daughter here tonight, and it brought back great memories of someone who stood by our side on many of the trips and was on our little cabinet that certainly was, he was very influential in helping us raise what was ultimately $1 billion. Natan, the period of time you talked about, I made at least one trip with my wife and 2 or 3 other members of the Jewish community, and we met with people. It was kind of a scary thing for us to do at that time, but we met with members of the Jewish community who really talked about it just as you talk about it. They recognized that they're Jewish. They certainly understood that there was an Israel to go to, and they too began this struggle to leave the Soviet Union, which was a very difficult thing. I was saying to Joel tonight on the way over, I had never made such a trip in my life, and my wife was very concerned about the KGB, not as concerned as you were, but she was concerned. And she was convinced, and maybe they were following us on our trip wherever we went. We kept looking over our shoulders to see. But every single night, and I think we were there for 4 nights, just before we went to sleep, she would walk over to the lamp, look at the lamp and say, "Good night, KGB." And then she'd go to sleep with her eyes open. And that was the first of many trips.
But it was a dangerous time for American Jews or North American Jews to go to Russia, to bring the books, to bring the food. I was asked to do that because there weren't a lot of people doing it. And my wife at that time definitely wanted to go. And I'm the risk taker in the family, and she's not, but she wanted to go. But I had a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And I said, I can't do it because of the fear that you could be arrested and held in the former Soviet Union. So it was a scary time.
Well, I can tell you that because I became at the time like an official spokesman of our movement, so I had practically every day to meet with the American Jewish tourists who were sent by different organizations. And it seems that it really was like one big Soviet Jewry movement, but in fact there were many different organizations, Union of Struggle for Soviet Jewry, and Conference for Struggle for Soviet Jewry, and Coalition for Struggle for Soviet Jewry, and Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry, and many other organizations. And they were competing and disagreeing with one another, and sometimes you had to send the same information with 2 tourists from different organizations from New York because they will not talk to one another. But when...
It's the Jewish way.
Yeah, the very Jewish way. But when I was arrested, and all those tourists whom I met was on few dozens of pages, 600-700 names. They were all called accomplices in anti-Soviet activity. They were all like one big organization. For KGB, there was absolutely no difference. And they saw it as American Jewry as a whole as the big enemy. And they were right, because in fact, it doesn't matter what our internal contradictions, it was one huge movement and extremely powerful. KGB was telling me during interrogations, who is supporting you? The bunch of students and housewives. And really, if you look at the leaders of the movement, there were many students and many housewives. But there were Jewish housewives and Jewish students and Jewish doctors and Jewish scientists. And then they proved that this army of students and housewives defeated KGB. That's what happened.
So you can applaud yourselves, because what I'm about to say, some of you probably participated in. There was a march in Washington I'm going to forget the year.
7th of December of 1987.
He didn't forget. Yeah. So there were 250,000 people, Jewish people, and there were probably some non-Jewish supporters as well.
Which was the largest gathering ever
at that time
of Jews in one place at one time.
Yeah. So it was really the conference of
Presidents?
not the conference of presidents, the Russian,
the
Soviet Union. In any event, we brought people from all over the country to come to this event, and some very important people spoke, and I believe it was President Bush,
Vice President Bush.
Who was very instrumental in helping us do a lot of things. But I'm convinced that gathering of American Jews, and I can't forget that, I remember we took our daughter, the youngest daughter, and she will never forget. It's an amazing feeling to be amongst 250,000 people, your people, who are trying to make a statement, and they did make a statement, and the movement started to go like this. So it was very effective, and we should be proud of the fact that we all came together for a very important movement.
Well, it's important to notice that when the idea of this demonstration came, and I was just out of the prison, and everybody was expecting that Gorbachev will come with his first visit to Washington. And when Jewish activists, we proposed that hundreds of thousands of American Jews will come to Washington. There was a number of Jewish organizations who were saying, you cannot use such big numbers to Washington in winter. Jews will not come in such big numbers. You said there was estimation of experts that maximum you can bring 18,000 Jews, only those who live close. They said it's not New York. How you're speaking about hundreds of thousands? There will be inflation of the figures, and then there'll be big disappointment. And I then spent 3 months in America, traveling from one city to the other, including Detroit. And I have to say, everywhere where I was speaking, people were signing for buses immediately after. They all wanted to come. So after some time, all the leaders found out that everybody wants. Well, then, like 1 month before Gorbachev came, there was a special committee for organization of this demonstration. So, and 250,000 came, and it was such a powerful statement, and it gave opportunity to President Reagan to start his meeting with Gorbachev from speaking that, you see, my people spoke, I cannot do anything. If you will not open the gates, we cannot improve our relations. But what I want to say, that we Jews have a lot of power, a lot of energy. We have to trust ourselves. We should not be afraid. 18,000, that was the estimation of the experts, and 250,000 Jews came to Washington, and of course it was like a final battle for the opening of the gates.
And when those gates opened, to your point, Natan, Jewish people, when they come together, as Joel mentioned, can really make a statement. And it was that kind of movement, that kind of energy that kicked off Operation Exodus. And as you all know, part of that campaign was Operation Solomon, which we should talk about a little bit before we go home tonight, because that also is an amazing story. But here is an opportunity. It's really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, particularly for people like Joel and myself, who recognize that we can really save lives. Having been in the Soviet Union, as I mentioned earlier, I could see that the Jewish community was really at risk. And it was our responsibility to organize a campaign that would bring these people, our people, out of the former Soviet Union. And that's really the story I guess we should talk about tonight, because it's an amazing story that the American Jewish community could come together and ultimately raise $1 billion and ultimately bring 1.4 million Jews from the former Soviet Union both to Israel and to the United States, and in the middle of that bring 14,000 Ethiopians who were not at risk. They were being held hostage and they would have been killed, and we brought them to Israel. It's a story that not too many communities, if any community, can talk about. It's really what the Jewish people are all about when they decide that they're going to come together and do something. And the moment was there, the moment was right, and the Jewish community came together with great leadership, by the way.
In preparation for the campaign, Marvin led a group of 7 of us to travel to the former Soviet Union to try to determine how many Russian Jews there were and how many would be coming out and the kind of money that we would need. David Hermelin was part of that group as well. And I remember distinctly going to Riga, Latvia, where we were taken around by a woman by the name of Bella. And she showed us the Ranban forest where 40,000 Jews had been killed by the Latvians. And then she took us to the synagogue, round synagogue, and she told us the story of how the Jews came to the synagogue and the synagogue was burned down. And we found that as we traveled through Russia, that the Jews were in trouble. We were trying to get a number, and I wanted a reaction maybe from Natan, but we figured there was something like 700,000 Russian Jews at that time, and we figured 300,000 or 400,000 would want to come out, and we built our campaign around that Marvin headed up. And lo and behold, as we got into it, the more Jews we brought out, the more Jews that they were, because people began to recognize and be willing to admit that they were Jewish. So that was the impetus and beginning of the Exodus campaign. And I just wanted to get your thought from your point of view. We were there doing it, you were already out. What was your reaction to what UGA was trying to do in terms of numbers of people and dollars? Do you have a feel
First
for
of all, let me put it from Israeli perspective. In Israel, though, of course, Israel was playing a very important role in fighting against Iron Curtain, but there was always a skepticism that a very big number of Jews will come. And when we, Jewish activists who just came from prisons and being refusing, we made a very simple estimation that if you look for the number of invitations which were sent to Israel, to Soviet Union, and the number of people who came out, there are still, it's at least 400,000 Jews who are waiting for the first opportunity. And we were always saying that the moment the Iron Curtain will go down, at least 400,000 will come in the first wave. And there was a lot of skepticism. Finally, in the 1988, like in the middle, it became clear that it is happening. And I was at the special committee which was convened then Deputy Foreign Minister Yossi Beilin. What are the estimations? And then already not activists, but official expert of the government, Ulishka Kesher, says our estimation is that next year about 200,000 people will come in 1 year. That's really what happened. And there was a shock. They said, what? What shall we do with them? That's, for the first time, the question was not whether they'll come, but what if they really will come in such numbers, how will we absorb it? And then there started the airplanes coming. Every day, 1, 2, 3 airplanes. And there was a lot of fear because they said suddenly the number of doctors will become so big. What will do with them? The number of musicians is 10 times bigger than the number of musicians who need them. And there was like panic. There were, for a few months, there was real panic. That's from point of Israeli government. And then, of course, then American Jewry took a lead. And there was a question of raising funds, and there was a question of American loan guarantees. By the way, Max Fisher played extremely important, the most important role in making sure that Bush government will give this, I don't remember, like $20 billion.
No, $10 billion.
$10 billion of loan guarantee.
Get to loan guarantees.
And the cash, of course, the cash came from American Jewry, this $1 billion. And then, in fact, that changed everything. Like, in a few months, there was Israeli government became confident that they can deal with this. And, of course, a successful integration of this then 1 million Jews who came to Israel changed the country, simply changed the country. Today, by the way, there is a lot of concerns in Israel about the fact that all those doctors who then came now are retiring for pension. And suddenly, what we will do without all these doctors?
Yeah, I wouldn't want...
Send them here. We need doctors here.
But they're on pension. So.
As we sit here and look back 25 years, we raised $1 billion, which is an addition to the 800,000 annual that we were raising across the United States. An unheard of number at that time, when $1 billion was really $1 billion. Yes. But it wasn't easy. And I wouldn't want, because we're talking about what we did and how we accomplished it, but it was tough raising that money. Not from the individuals, from the institutions here in the United States. Marvin and I were alone when we came back. And from that trip we took to Russia, telling the UJA, telling the communities, we want to raise, at that time, our goal was 425 million because we didn't realize how many were going to be coming out. But the communities were not in favor of that. I was also an officer of the Council of Jewish Federations, which was the main organization for federations. And Marty Cryer, who was the executive here, was head of the Council of Jewish Federations. And he told me, because I was an officer of CJF as well, the most that we can raise in the Federation is $225 million. Well, Marvin and I knew that that was nowhere near what we were going to have to raise. So we had a UJA meeting. We voted for $425 million. Mm-hmm. And like yesterday, I remember going to Marty Cryer's office, and he was not happy with me that I had gone back on what he thought was a deal with him at 225, but it was hard. Within 3 months, we converted the federations, and they agreed to the 425 million, but not in the beginning.
No, it was, when you look back, you ask yourself, why would people resist? Because here's an opportunity that we have to respond to. But the bureaucracy was such that we really had to work hard. We spent 3 months without raising a dollar. We didn't even talk about dollars, just advocating through the major organizations, the CJF and the JDC and the UIA and on and on and on, to get behind this. They resisted. And they resisted because it's a lot of money. And no one could really judge or predict what the resources were within the Jewish community. But it wasn't just Joel and myself. There were a few others. We understood and we knew that here's the opportunity. You can't let it slip away because God knows what will happen. Natan didn't address this, but right about that time, as Russian Jews were leaving, the level of anti-Semitism increased dramatically. Yeah. I remember going on one trip. It was also a scary trip to Russia, and sitting in a panel with a member of the Russian government. And Russian Jews now were leaving, and they were coming to Israel. And he looked at me, he knew I was in a leadership capacity, and he said, you're taking our people. And I took a deep breath, and I was a little scared, but I looked him in the eye and I said, they're not your people, they're our people, and they are going home. And he said nothing after that. And that was enough for the people who were with us. There might have been 20 or 30 people in our group. Again, to come home motivated and do what had to be done. To organize a campaign to, as Joel said, to raise, the first go-around was $425 million on top of a $750 or $800 million annual campaign. But that got done because initially a small group of people, lay leadership, of which Joel and I pulled together, were strong enough to go out and ask people for money to save lives. I really believe that the first 350,000 Soviet Jews that came to Israel were at risk.
Yeah.
I really believe they were at risk for their lives. What more motivation could you have as a member of the Jewish community than to know you've got to step up and do something? And we started the campaign. I remember we did it with, how many people with the Breakfast of Champions? We called it the Breakfast of Champions. We organized, it was Max Fisher, again, who helped me pull together, I believe, 20 people. And we raised $65 million at a breakfast, and that kicked off the campaign. That came from 20 people. People were giving $10 million and $5 million and on and on. But that breakfast and that first fundraiser set the stage and set the tone for the rest of the campaign. You don't raise what was ultimately $1 billion without getting major, major gifts and giving everyone in the Jewish community the opportunity to contribute, and we did that. Anyone at any level, and there were things going on all over the country that gave people the opportunity to contribute so they could say they were part of this miracle.
Natan, I was wondering, when the Russian Jews were coming out, there was an intifada going on. There were Scud missiles coming. What was the reaction of the Russians when they come into this country with freedom and all this is going on? Could you give us a feeling of how the Russians felt?
I can only not give a feeling what they felt, but now from the experience of many years and now as the chairman of the Jewish Agency, I have to say it's never stops Jews from coming to Israel. In those days, the fact, it's really, Intifada started, in fact, the same day when we had our demonstration in Washington, by chance. But the big event which started first, Intifada, was on the 6th of December of 87, and we had it on the 7th of December. But so when the big wave of Aliyah started in 89, 90, really, there was a lot of terrorist attacks. There was suicide bombing started just in those days. And so it seemed like scary. The Jews who were coming from the Soviet Union, they were coming with such a feeling of relief. You know, you say that it's not only that their life was probably in danger, but suddenly the Iron Curtain is opened and nobody knows when it will be closed. And they were really afraid. There was a fear that it can close any day. And so Israel was working like crazy, sent thousands of people from Jewish agency practically to every city of Soviet Union. And Soviet Jews themselves didn't know when it would finish. So they were in a hurry to leave. And they were coming and they were, oh, thanks God, it's behind us. At least now we are sure that we are free. And this feeling of freedom and coming home was thousands times more powerful than any fears. And I have to say, going to these days, just now we have such a big wave of new immigrants from Western Europe. I met them just in the times of the war, in 2014. I'm meeting them in the airport, and they go straight to Ashkelon, Ashdod, to the shelters. And we are giving them first instructions how to behave if there is alarm into the shelters. And I'm asking, aren't you afraid? They said, what afraid? In Paris, I was afraid. Here, I'm not afraid. I'm at home. So was never a factor, the question of security. The factor was whether we will be able, and by the way, it's also today, Jews who are coming, saying whether we will be able to support our family, whether we will be able to work, what will be with our children, what kind of education they will get. So these were the real questions, and the big concern. Housing became suddenly a huge problem, housing in the country. And all these questions were solved mainly because of you.
You know, I talked about the difficulty of the campaign, but once it was realized, the large number of people that were coming and the needs of Israel, and Natan just mentioned housing, the original financing of Exodus was $3 billion from the Israeli government and $1 billion from the diaspora. But that clearly wasn't enough. And he referred earlier to a $10 billion loan guarantee because the Israeli government needed the extra money to support the housing and the integration of the Russians. But the American Jewish community did something even beyond that that has never been done before, and I'll tell you, will never be done again, and that is Corky Goodman of the Crown family in Chicago came up with a loan guarantee program where the banks of Israel would loan money to the Russians to buy homes, and it was guaranteed by the federation system of the United States. And what they put up for that was their endowment funds as a security against that. Nothing like that had ever been done before, and I doubt if it will ever be done again, but it was so critical at that moment to integrate these people properly into the state of Israel that the federations stepped up to the need.
I think that one of the things that helped the federations move in that direction was we were committed to bringing as many people, American contributors, to Israel as possible. There was never a mission to Israel, whether it was 10 people or it was 500 people, that we didn't bring to the airport, to Lud, usually at 2 o'clock in the morning, to see immigrants, to see the Soviet Jews come off that plane. I went there a lot. One night sticks out in my mind. I remember on one of my trips to Russia, I met a 90-year-old, maybe in excess of 90-year-old man. I just saw him and shook his hand. And within 6 months, I'm standing on the tarmac with a couple of hundred people from the United States. And the first person to come off that plane was this 90-year-old man. He couldn't speak English, he couldn't speak Hebrew, he only spoke Russian. So I went up and I greeted him and helped him come down the stairs. And he didn't know what to say, and I didn't know what to say. And he said the Shechionu. It was one of those moments in your life that you never forget, because there sits exactly what we were doing and why we were doing it. It was an important moment for me, and I think important moment for the 500 people who were standing behind me.
You know, another story of the people we took to Israel as part of fundraising is one of my favorite David Hermelin stories. We took a group, we chartered a helicopter, we were flying our helicopter, showing the people what was going on in Israel, and the helicopter had engine problems. And unfortunately, we had to sit down right in the middle of the West Bank in a Palestinian area. Well, we were very nervous on that plane, but not David Hermelin. Some people from the village started coming, David took out his big salami. We had bread, started slicing and giving the people a little something to eat.
I was smart enough not to be on that helicopter.
Natan, well, for all of us, what do you think the result for Israel and the Jewish people of the Exodus? How did it change Israel in your view?
Well, first of all, 1 million Jews came to Israel. It's at that moment 20% of population in a few years. So not only is 1 million people, but these were people with a lot of knowledge, coming from the country where our parents explained to us that you must be the best in your profession. So now they're living and they're coming to Israel and they want to succeed in their profession with a lot of ambition. And though in the first year there were a lot of difficulties and many people didn't work in their professions, if you look 20 years later, the average income of these families is higher than the average income in the country. So it was the unique. There is no other example in the world of such a quick and successful integration. But more, they brought a lot of competitiveness in the society. Society became much more dynamic. Also, society is more open to, let's say, they were different type of Jews, meaning that they had no religious background. They had no traditional Jewish education. For many of them, their identity was mainly this knowledge that there is anti-Semitism and that we have to be together to help one another. But that brought a very important dimension to all the discussion in Israeli society, what it means to be Jewish, and more tolerance, more openness. So society became, in general, very different, much more dynamic, much more open. But I think every Israeli felt and feels until this day a huge pride that was the best proof why Israel is needed. That in the moment of need, not only there is no catastrophe, but we are bringing down the Iron Curtain, we all together, and then we are making these people not all equal part of the country, but very successful. So Soviet Jews got their freedom. Every Israeli got a lot of confidence that that is what we are there for. And this feeling of Jewish solidarity, of one family, became much stronger. So no doubt that, and I am not speaking also about security, about what it did to Israeli high-tech. You will not, Israel is very proud by its high-tech. You will not find any high-tech company where Russian-speaking Jews are not playing a very important role. The army, of course. So it was really strengthening and empowering of every Jew, but also Israel as a whole.
And it wasn't easy, I remember the early days, for Israel to absorb so many people. It was very complicated, and the Jewish Agency really stepped up and did something that I don't think could happen anywhere else in the world. Certainly can't happen here in America, and we're pretty good at what we do. We could never replicate what the Israelis did through the Jewish Agency and the JDC support as well, to absorb that many people in a relatively short period of time. Yes, it was 10 years for the whole thing to happen, but so much of it happened up front. And when you couple that with bringing 14,000 Ethiopian Jews, which was...
In one night.
Yeah, in one night. You know, that campaign, I should just share this with you. I remember being on a telephone call with Simcha Dinitz, who was your predecessor of going back a few years, and Corky Goodman, myself, and Mendel Kaplan, who was the chairman of the Keren HaYesod. And we were presented on that telephone call with the following. We were told that there are 14,000 Ethiopian Jews who are being held hostage. And the only way that we could relocate them was Mengistu, who was the president of Ethiopia at the time, wanted $35 million, and he wanted it put in a bank account in Europe. And so the question was, can we raise $35 million? Well, before Simcha finished the sentence, I said, of course we're going to raise $35 million. And of course, we went on to do that. That was an important moment for all of us. That night, that weekend, we brought 14,000 Ethiopian Jews to Israel over a weekend. And I was invited to come and be there. I had to make a big decision. My son was graduating from Cornell. It was either go to the graduation or go there. I went to Cornell. But I asked my best friend if he would go. And you might want to say a word about that, because he went.
Yeah, I want to end with that eventually. But just one last question, really for the three of us. I had talked about the millennial generation and how they can be involved. We had this wonderful opportunity during our lifetimes that changed our lives. What are some of the things that the people here should be involved in? Some of the millennials that are searching for their Jewish identity. Do you have any thoughts of types of involvement?
Well, you know what, first let me say a few words about my involvement in Ethiopian Jewry. Because when first operation was operation of Moses, I was in prison. And I read from the Soviet newspaper, Pravda. That's the only newspaper that you could read in prison if you're not in punishing cell. Punishing cell, you cannot read anything. But so I read an article that Israeli army invaded independent African state, hijacked these citizens, gave them name Falashi, said that they are Jews, and brought them captured and brought them to Israel. That's how Israeli army is getting the the soldiers for their aggressive things. From this article, I understood that something very big happened, and that we found Jews in Africa, but I didn't know the details. When there was Operation Shlomo, I was already in Israel, and suddenly there are rumors that in a couple of days something is happening. Maybe this night something is happening. And I came to Mendel Kaplan, and I said, look, and I was an activist, I was not a Jewish agency. But I said, I have to be there. He said, if really it's happening. He said, I cannot tell you if it is happening, but I cannot send you, you're not my Jewish. If you can go as a journalist, I'll send you. So I immediately organized that I will send to this journalist. And I come to home, and Shabbat is beginning in an hour. And I say to my wife, we will have Kiddush, but then they'll come and take me. I fly to Ethiopia for the separation. And she said, how you can? I say, I go as a journalist. She said, what? It's Hilul Shabbat. If you go as a journalist and not saving the life of the Jew, then you cannot violate Shabbat. So I called to Mendel Kaplan and say, can I go as the worker or the steward on the airplane? He said, what? We are having this operation, and you go the way you want, call yourself as you want. So I said to Vitaly, I have a permission that I'll go there as a worker, so I'll be working. And really, in this airplane, I was giving the food, the water. I have to say, it was so moving and so exciting to see. That was a civil war, and because the president, so-called dictator, was bribed by American Jewry, so he stopped war for a few hours, gave all the airplanes to come to take these people, and then the war started again, and he was exiled, but he had the money which Marvin and others gave to him. So it was really bribery in order to save Jews. It was classical example of Pidyon Shfuim, when we are paying for our people. But it's also, they were young people from Israeli army, young people from Jewish agency, with the help of American Jews who were really saving people from the center. And it was one of the most moving, maybe the most moving pictures that you ever could see, how these big families with children of 5 years old are keeping children of 2 years old, and they're taken to the airplanes in full silence. And then in the airplane, they sit for hours in the full silence, and when they're told that Jerusalem is just under us, they start shouting the only word that you can understand, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, and sing, and to think that it's people for 2,000 years were praying. Now, what I want to say, if young Jews want to be active part of the Jewish history, for this you want to be, if you discover how interesting it is, there are always things to do. If you look today what's happening on American universities, it's one of the biggest challenges, where we have hundreds of thousand young Jews who are deciding at this moment whether to be connected to anything Jewish and Israel or not, because of this very negative atmosphere. And it's on every university, and I went to more than 100 universities, I can say, the moment there is hardcore of young Jews who know how to debate, who are not afraid, who are not ashamed, they can change all the atmosphere and influence on thousands of other students who are around them. But for this, what you need to really, that you really want to be active part of Jewish history. And if you want, there is always opportunity to do it.
I agree with everything that Natan has said. I would just add one or two comments, and that is that I think if we can encourage young people to seize any opportunity that arises, and sometimes you even have to make an opportunity within the Jewish community, that if they in fact participate, they will, and lots of you in this room know what I'm about to say, they will get as much out of it as they are contributing, both in dollars, time, and effort. And the way to understand that is to look back and see what we have done as a Jewish people, not just thousands of years ago, but within all of our lifetimes, and the miracles that we were able to create, of which Exodus was one. So, and you know, not unlike myself, if one were to ask me what was the most important thing that has happened to me in my volunteer community, I would say it was being the chairman of Operation Exodus. It helped shape me as a person. And I wasn't a kid when I started to do this. Someone asked me tonight about it. It was 25 years ago. I was 50 years old. But I was still formulating my thoughts and changing as a human being. And I think that's what we have to tell the next generations.
Well, I think it's time to bring this program to a close.